So I think the idea of creativity is it's obviously very popular when you're a child. So when you'll get coloring books, you'll do finger painting and that sort of thing, watercolors and whatnot. That's what creativity is when you're a child, when you're growing up. When you get to be a little bit older, creativity is a lot more geared towards, what you can make. Not so much in the picture sense, but more in I guess you could create pictures in that sense, but also the idea is it grows as you grow. So you could you could write poetry, you could create pictures, you could make sculptures at that age if if you're inclined enough. Mm. You could also just be verbally creative. You could, make really good jokes. You could make, I don't know, just make up funny acronyms, that sort of thing. And as you get older, your creativity starts to change. And, unfortunately, for a lot of people, myself included, it starts to dwindle as you get older. Because you're so inclined to be pressured by, friends, society, the expectations for people that could be tied to, gender, race, identity, things you would normally place your identity in. And, for me, it's just I want to be able to take myself seriously, so I try not to act or dress in a certain way that would be considered silly. So my uh, my creative wardrobe, as we'll call it, uh, definitely dwindled as I got older, but I think that's kind of for the best. As far as creativity now, my creative journey, right now I'm definitely I call it a constant or consistent work in progress. So for example, I don't like to because I'm in the mindset now where I don't want to say that I'm not creative because I definitely have something to offer because I may not be able to draw or create in the same way that others do. I can't draw a really beautiful picture or create a sculpture or write really good poetry. But I've noticed that I'm not to toot my own horn, but I'm decently verbally creative. I love making jokes. I love creating acronyms for things. I love just being decently quick witted. So, or I just have a gift. If some people will say that I have a gift for just saying the right thing at the right time, or something along those lines. So just being lifting people up is definitely a creative talent that a lot of people have, and if they don't, well, it does not hurt to pursue it. I believe everybody can have it at least to some degree. And again, not to toot my own horn, but that's just what I've noticed. Another thing, I've always loved to just write, creative writing. It's been a long time since I've done such a thing, but it's a fun practice, and I've always thought that, or I've always felt like creating those alternate worlds was a good escape, and it's really easy to uh, get into your own head in a good way. You get into your own head when you create these worlds. You can just do whatever you please. For example, give people really weird superpowers, or just go nuts. You really have all the artistic and creative freedom that you could possibly want at your fingertips. Writing notes on your phone, writing it on paper. Just getting into that mindset and being able to do that with your own head is just a beautiful thing, and it is such a tragedy that that spark dwindles as we get older. And of course, there's a lot of uh, authors who are not succumbing to such a thing. They're writing fantasy novels and young adult stories. Contemporary fantasy. So it's the the issue of the creative spark dwindling as we get older, or the willingness to be, I'll say this, the willingness to be unafraid to write first drafts. So not being afraid to write first drafts. That is prominent in a lot of authors. And obviously everybody's going to have their individual fears, like, oh, is this going to be good? Is this going to be as good as the last book? I think a noble practice is to realize that not everything is going to be as good as others want it to be, but if it's good to you, then it doesn't necessarily matter. And of course, you don't want to put the focus all on you, as it is said in the Emerge book by Don Perini on page 28. Sorry, 27. It says, "Let us build families, write stories, and create businesses for the purpose of advancing God's kingdom, not our own. It is our mandate." So, whether you're finger painting, or writing stories, or just writing poetry, or just doing whatever you are inclined to do artistically, creatively, do so for the glory of God. And of course, a lot of people will use creative talents, like, painting, drawing, and building, to kind of sort of cope with the societal pressures that exist, and I think that's a good thing to do. Because, well, I don't believe that if you have these talents that you shouldn't use them. You should obviously very much use them, but building the kingdom of God doesn't necessarily mean you're just doing it to proselytize or build up a church or whatever, or just, evangelize and whatnot. Sometimes you're just doing it so you can connect with God on a personal level, which is a very noble practice. And for me, in my experience and in my journey of creativity, as I said before, I love creative writing. I've always loved just creating worlds. And one of my more, well, not necessarily recent, but one of my characters is actually an archangel who comes down to earth in human form, we'll say that. And he's supposed to represent God's divine providence. And he's supposed to teach people, take heart in the faith. Don't be afraid, don't be discouraged. A lot of biblical principles just in a completely fiction story. So it's very easy to create worlds and to just let your mind go all over the place. If you are of that faith, it's very easy to find these opportunities to place biblical principles. You don't necessarily want to have them be directly stated, of course. Of course you can do that, but in my experience, I prefer to have it be heavily implied. So for example, one of your characters is a very committed evangelical Christian, right? In the story, you may choose to have this character be very outspoken and to just be very on the nose about it. Like, I love Jesus, I'm a Christian, and, the list goes on. Or you can choose to be a little more subtle about it, and I don't think it's an issue to do either one. But in my experience, I would prefer to be a little more subtle. I would say I would have this character behave in such a way that is a stark contrast from the way somebody else would in any given situation, especially a stressful one. They would try to be calm, they would try to find the positive, but they wouldn't force their positivity and force their beliefs on somebody else, because I try to live my life that way. So that's just an example of where I could use my faith and my belief in God and be able to use it with my creative talent, if indeed I had much of a thing.